So my name is Steve Hickman. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Global Compassion Coalition. Most of you would be aware of that since you signed up to attend this event, and many of you, I believe, are members. So we're very happy to have you on board with the Global Compassion Coalition. As you know, and as I mentioned, our mission as an organization is to build a huge coalition of voices, of people engaged in the work of compassion, people interested in compassion more generally, and in placing compassion at the heart of global society. And we wanted to start off this series of panel discussions with an exploration of how compassion relates to actually making change in the world. I think that as I have gone about promoting the coalition and speaking with people, I've yet to meet anyone who was anti-compassion. Pretty much it's a popular thing. People understand the benefits of it to some degree, and the feeling of compassion, and value it as a quality, and miss it in many of our systems and our situations, the things that we face in the world these days, recognizing that compassion is missing. And so everyone is pro-compassion, but perhaps you haven't had the opportunity to really explore how compassion may be related to actually making change in the world, and how compassion relates to change. So that's why we titled this Compassion as a Catalyst for Change, and we invited panelists from different cultural perspectives to speak with us and to speak with each other about this idea, about how does this attitude, this way of being, actually relate to change and making change. Sometimes that's a tricky topic that people aren't able to connect the dots. I know I've struggled with it over the years to really see the connection, and this is an opportunity to delve into that a bit further. So we look forward to the discussion. And I will say that as one sort of guiding question was one that actually Gonzalo, one of our panelists, brought up, who said, do you feel despair when you look at global crises, ecological, political, economic, migratory, war, etc.? If you do, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with the despair? I think that so many people have been excited about the coalition because they feel some degree of that despair over the state of things today and the absence of compassion. And I'd love to hear from our panelists as they talk a little bit about how do they deal with that. And I think I have an idea. I think it has something to do with the possibility of change, but I would love to hear more. And I think that could inspire many of us who are here today to kind of see where they could find some hope, where you can find some hope for us as a human race and the planet, etc. So we have four panelists, two of them here, two of them I'm hoping are still going to show up, but I'd like to introduce you to them, just say a tiny bit about them, just so you know who they are if you weren't familiar. Gonzalo Brito-Pons is a clinical psychologist from Chile. He's trained in compassion at the University of Derby and the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, CCARE, at Stanford, and is the director of Compassion Cultivation Training, teacher training in the Spanish-speaking world. I could go on, but that gives you a little glimpse of him and his work. Developed and delivered all kinds of programs in mindfulness, emotion regulation, and the psychology of compassion. And we're very pleased to have him here. I'm hoping that my new friend Samineh Shaheem will join us. She's a fascinating woman of Persian descent who lives in the UK, who's done quite a bit of work around learning and development and executive education, and been the dean of a postgraduate global business university for 5 years, in addition to having the privilege to kind of work with a whole kaleidoscope of learning and skills and experiences to reach shared aspirations and support thousands of people through transformative journeys of various sorts. She's a fascinating Renaissance woman in many ways. And also, I'm hoping to see Hailan Guo, who is my dear friend and mindful self-compassion teacher and teacher trainer in China, who has both a medical degree and a psychology degree and background in neuroscience, and founded an amazing organization called Hailan Family Wellbeing, a huge network of teachers of compassion, self-compassion, internal family systems, supporting the people in China all over the country. And finally, we have our distinguished panel member, Paul Gilbert, professor of clinical psychology at the University of Derby and visiting professor at the University of Queensland, among other things, studying evolutionary approaches to mental health problems and compassion for over 30 years, founder of the Compassionate Mind Foundation, and was awarded the Order of the British Empire for his services to mental health. Again, we could list his accomplishments for quite some time. We won't do that today. That's enough. You probably know him already. So I'm going to invite Gonzalo to take some time, and hopefully the rest of our panelists will arrive shortly, but to say a little bit about this topic and himself and whatever he would like, and then we'll transfer over to the next panelist. Go ahead, Gonzalo.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the invitation, and congratulations on the starting of the Global Compassion Coalition. It's great to be here with one of my main teachers too, Paul Gilbert. It's an honor to share the space, and always an opportunity to learn. And sorry about my English, it's a bit rusty because I don't use it as often as my native Spanish. So in terms of your question, how do I deal with despair or hopelessness when I see the state of the world, because we are all very aware of mounting crisis in different aspects, ecology, political, economy, and so on. We just had a huge pandemic and so on. So a few things that are helpful to me, because I do get despair, is one, for me, is to watch the amount of to be careful about the amount of information that I'm consuming. From an evolutionary perspective, I don't think we were evolved to know about the suffering of 8 billion people. We develop in groups of 30 to 50 individuals. We're not meant to know about this global suffering in real time, 24 hours a day. So I think it has changed very quickly. We used to get the news once a day in the news, and now we can know them real time from any part of the world in our phone. So I think it's very easy to fall into what is called in literature compassion collapse, in which we feel there's so much hard things going on and so little power to do anything. So I find it useful for myself to be mindful of how much bad news I consume, and to be aware of mainly of things that I can contribute something to alleviate or prevent suffering. So in that sense, I also find it useful to focus on what I can do and what others are doing, and to basically take joy in what good people are doing that doesn't make it to the news that often, but there are literally millions of people doing amazing things, amazing compassionate initiatives all around the world. And particularly in my own experience, dedicating about 10 years in training compassion, I see a large distributed horizontal network of people in Latin America and Spain doing amazing things, which I can tell you about if we have time for that. But there are so many people doing amazing things in education, in healthcare, in community development, in law, and so on, with that core focus on compassion motivation. So I need to help myself in these times of despair. I need to remind myself of all the good that is going on out there, and take inspiration and nourish myself, the inspiration of others, to be an inspiration for others. So I think in that way we can compensate or go beyond despair to do what we can do. And I think, and maybe this doesn't apply to everyone, but in my own case, something that's really useful to deal with despair is to nourish a spiritual view on life, and to stay connected to the transcendent, which might be different for different people. For some might be Mother Nature, for others God or Buddha nature, and so on. And what I mean is that there will always be suffering in the world, in samsara. And by samsara, I mean the world we construct from a sense of solidified ego. So the world will never be perfect, and there will always be suffering. It doesn't mean that we cannot do anything to help others. We can, but if we are hoping that politicians will get wise and generous and compassionate, and the economy will work for everyone, and that we find happiness on earth, I think that's a pretty frustrating position. So I think to keep one foot on a, let's say, a secure attachment with the transcendent allows me to have another foot on relating with the world in the relative, from a sense of what Buddhists call relative compassion, relative bodhicitta, which is trying to do what I can do to help myself and others. So those are some of the things that I think are useful to me in terms of dealing with despair. And I think compassion, being compassion, motivation that can organize the individual mind and also the group mind, the culture. I think if we focus on the question, how can I nourish compassion in my mind and in the relationships that I'm part of, I think that can keep my mind going into a positive direction instead of feeling frustrated or depressed because there's not enough compassion out there. I think that part is key, because I think despair or hopelessness is part of the problem, to have the sense that there's nothing I can do. Everything is messed up and I cannot do anything about it. So yeah, that's something I would like to share in this early comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Lots to think about there. And much to my relief, we have the rest of our panel here, so I will let Samineh take over. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Steve. Please let me begin with apologizing. I've had issues connecting to the internet, and we got it sorted out, thank goodness, or I was going to take my phone and go stand in the street and use the neighbor's Wi-Fi. So apologies to those if you were waiting, and I'm here now. So thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be able to join you today. My name is Dr. Samineh Shaheem, and I am a professor of psychology and leadership. And I've been working in the space of learning and development for the last 25 years. Really, really interested in the human experience and our connectivity to ourselves in terms of self-awareness, who we are, what makes us tick, what are our emotional allergies, the relationships we have with others, and how we can improve those experiences. So I have worked as a university professor, I've worked as a consultant, working with different companies in designing, executing, and delivering learning and development opportunities. And I was the Dean and Executive Director of HALT International Business School for about 6 years. Oftentimes, or close to, yeah, for 5 years. And oftentimes people asked, how did a psychologist become a dean of a business school? And to which I often answered, why don't we have more psychologists as deans of business school? Because at the end of the day, if we're not considering people, if we're not understanding their psychology and human behavior and performance, and so then we're not able to fully understand their potential. From another perspective, then we're not there to be able to really and truly, pay attention to very important skills, such as being able to demonstrate and to teach this very important skill of being compassionate. So I think that throughout my career, compassion has been, somewhat of a both a natural presence, but also a learned skill that I've grown and nurtured in myself. and one that I have tried to impart and teach to my students and the people that I've worked with in the work that I do.
Thank you, Samineh. And it's my pleasure to introduce my dear friend Hailan, to who I shared a little bit about each of you before we came on board. So thank you, Samineh and Hailan. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I have little trouble to get on Zoom. Your Zoom's different from my end of the world. I'm from Beijing. So good to see all of you. And the special Paul Gilbert, Dr. Paul Gilbert, so I was, introduced by Chris Gilbert, and tend to maybe someday, kind of work with you. It's good to see you here. And thank you, Steve. So miss you so much. Okay, so the question is, how are you going to deal with the situation in the world, in those days. So I have introduced, mindful self-compassion actually from earthquake. I don't know if you all remember about 14 years ago now, year 2008. So earthquake in Sichuan was huge. I was called to volunteer work for 3 years. And myself, I was leading the team to go there to do intervention, trauma and stress intervention. And I brought my whole family to earthquake zone where you can still smell the corpse smell, kind of that situation. But I become very, very tired and kind of exhausted. I looking for some way to comfort myself. And I find Chris Gilbert. So I introduced him to China in 2011. In that, introduced self-compassion into China. So it's now been 12 years. Steve pretty much part of this whole process. So we know each other 12 years now, Steve. So I think it's a tremendous help to us. So, but I find why I agree with Gonzalo with what you said. Focus on what you can. So the situation in China is really dire, especially in recent years, pandemic, everything. So I think what we do is just focus on what we can do, not focus on what we cannot. They always give us hope because you only have so much time, energy. You can always think about something you can do. Any situation, you can do something about it. So I think that's one strategy, what I use in life and in organization in helping people. Second, so we're doing it in community. So I built this Hailan family well-being. So I have like a student over about 2,000 students, follow me to study 2 years. Every one of them study mindful self-compassion. So we have like army of mindful self-compassion. So I believe you kind of build like snowball. In the beginning, you have few people, and then so you have more people. Now we have at least 2,000 people who learn about the mindful self-compassion, and also I believe we have like 400 or 500 teachers right now over 12 years, and they can spread out. So that's what we do. I think it's much easier dealing any situation in community. So we build this very, very close, tight community. We see each other every day, basically, online. So we have this community we call the 865 system. So we have these communities. We teach, we share our worries, we share our joys. We share what kind of difficulty we have. So it was a tremendous help and support. We can share everything in the community. I think that's really, people always need a community. You can always find somebody kind of common humanity. You always can find somebody have kind of same kind of situation, and so you always can find comfort there, and and also I think you can practice together. You don't feel lonely. So mindfulness. Self-compassion, 3 components. We kind of use it, in community as very effective. And that's what we do is, we can use media. So we often host, like, you know, especially during pandemic, we host, you know, many of, you know, what do you call in United States, you know, just live, you know, I guess seminar, something. So the highest number what we have, like at one time 500,000 people online. You know, so we teach you know, the way how you can care for yourself. We share many mindful self-compassion tools in so many ways. You know, people, you can only be with yourself. I think that in this way is very helpful. Also, you can reach lots of people in the same time. So nowadays we have live stream every day in Hailan Family Wellbeing. So we have all different kind of, I have like over 50 coaches, so they can teach people every day. So that's another way to do it. And also we have newsletter, and we have video record of self-compassion exercises. So you know, so we can spread out to people. So that's those kind of ways what we have been doing. So
thank you, Hailan, and I appreciate the connection between the personal, the practice of self-compassion as you're talking about it, and facing these huge things like the earthquake you talked about. And this is our particular interest here, I think, is connecting the personal to the public, to the whole human race, so to speak, to face the big problems by changing we change the world one heart at a time, but we can also multiply, as you've done so beautifully in China. So thank you for that. So we'll hand it over to Professor Gilbert, if you'd like. Go ahead, Paul. Oops, you're muted.
First of all, thank you so much for organizing this and all the wonderful work, really magical work you're doing for the coalition, just terrific. So you gave me permission just to share a few slides, so I'm going to take that. And I noticed a question come up in the chat about what is the nature and cultivation of compassion. So I'm going to address that. So here we go. So there we go, just start on that. So I'm an evolutionist, and I'm also a clinical psychologist, and I've been working with people who have mental health problems. So I've been doing that for a little bit of time now. And a lot of our studies of compassion have come out from understanding the problems that people have who have mental health problems. Now, one of the things I want to say is that compassion is rooted in an evolved motivational system for caring. But it's quite important we understand how motivational systems work. And all motivations work on what are called algorithms. And an algorithm is, if A, then do B, right? Now, your body has an algorithm for temperature. If your temperature goes very low, you will shiver. But if it goes very high, you'll start to sweat. You can't control that. Your body controls that. Now, we know there are different algorithms. For example, consider the algorithm for threat. So if a predator appears to prey, then that activates the threat system and they have to get away. On the other hand, if it's to do with food, then when they see food, you don't want to get on your motorbike and run away. You want to have a different physiological response, which will guide you towards eating behavior. And if it's a sexual opportunity, this time of the year, pigeons on my lawn are getting ready for engagement, then you want to stimulate a different physiological system to prepare you for mating. Now, the male birds on my lawn, they fluff their wings about like this. I've tried it with my wife. It really doesn't work. But the one that we're interested in is this one. This is the one we're interested in, is the sensitivity to suffering and need that will then trigger the physiological systems which orientate us to caring behavior. So we know then that compassion has an evolutionary history, and we also know that it has a whole physiological signature. So we can look at it like this. We can see that evolution builds these algorithms with physiological systems and pathways, and they have detectors. You can detect signals of threat or signals of food or whatever, and then you respond. Now, in the case of compassion and caring, we've done quite a lot of, not we, us, the world, has done a lot of studies, and we now know how the brain works when it is triggered for compassion. Now, this is very, very important because we also know that there are ways in which we can train people to stimulate these different physiological pathways. We can train people to stimulate areas of their brain which will help them to become more compassionate. We can stimulate patterns within the autonomic nervous system, particularly the vagus nerve, which helps them become more compassionate. So when we look at compassion as an algorithm, we can see then that the stimulus detection, it's going to be a sensitivity to suffering, that's the first thing, and then that is associated with a commitment to try to alleviate and prevent suffering. So we can look at the first part then. So the first part then is the ability to pay attention, to notice, to engage, to move towards suffering, as opposed to moving away. And Gonzalo's made a very important point that we're quite good at doing this with relatively small groups of people and people we sort of know. When it comes to the global world, it becomes more difficult. So stimulus engagement can become more difficult in certain contexts. And therefore, we need courage, because when we engage with suffering, our first response is to experience stress. When we engage with suffering, we're going to be distressed by what we're engaging with, obviously. And the second component is wisdom. We need to know how to do it so that we can not be overwhelmed, not get burnt out, not turned away. And then the second aspect of compassion is, so what do you do? Okay, so you've turned towards it, you can understand it now, but what do you do? And we now know that there are different systems in the brain which regulate these two different processes: our ability to engage, our ability to pay attention, our ability to tolerate suffering, but also a second set of processes are involved with taking action. What do we do? And for both of these, we need wisdom and courage. So courage without wisdom can be reckless. We dive in, not knowing what to do and get into trouble. But on the other hand, knowing what to do, but not having the courage to do it, makes it ineffective. So compassion then has these two processes. And when we're training people in compassion, we train them to have the wisdom and the courage for these two processes. Now, the other thing that's quite important for human compassion is the recognition that we are different from other animals because we have capacities for mindfulness and awareness. We have a knowing awareness, for example. We have empathic awareness, and we have knowing intentionality. Now, these in themselves are quite complicated, so I'm not going to go too much into them. But what happens is when we use our knowing awareness, when we use our empathic awareness, when we use knowing intentionality, we turn caring behavior into compassion. Now, this is important because the second part that I want to say to you is that, unfortunately, compassion has to compete with other motivational systems. And we know that many animals engage in competitive behavior, what we call control and hold. And for many animals, really, the individuals that get the biggest slice of the actions are often related to those who are most aggressive. So dominant hierarchies are very, very common throughout the animal kingdom. Bonobos are a little bit different, so I've put them to one side. Now, the key thing about this is to be aware that caring for the other and concern with the suffering you're causing gets turned off when this motivational system is turned on. Now, I want you to keep that in mind because it's going to be very important for some of the things I'm going to say in a moment. So remember then, competitive behavior turns off empathy for the harm that you're causing. And if anything, competitive behavior entices us to be pleased by the caring, by the harm that we're doing. So here are some mountain goats. Now, these mountain goats, for some weeks of the year, when the breeding system starts, they start bashing into each other. But you see, they don't really understand what they're doing, you know. Sorry, Fred, I don't know why we're doing this. And I hope I haven't given you a headache. It's okay, it's not your fault, George. We are under control of powerful hormones. So we need to be aware then that competitive behavior, which is triggered, tends to turn off caring behavior. Now, this is very, very important because humans have a terrible dark side. We are one of the most vicious, the most nasty species that have ever existed on this planet. If you look at our history of war, tribalism, abuse, slavery, torture, sadism, you can go on and on. Think of the Roman games. Think of, how we used to crucify people or burn them or whatever it is. And so we have to take into account of that although we have a wonderful compassionate side, we also have a very big dark side. And that dark side is partly linked to our competitiveness. But as I say, we've also got another side, which we call the compassionate mind. And this mind evolved primarily in hunter-gatherer societies for caring and sharing. So this mind is very much a mind of controlling and holding. And this mind is very much for caring and sharing. And we know that these different minds are related to different physiological systems. And we also know that these different minds are also related to culture and history and context. So the question is then, what turns off the compassionate mind? And that is where a lot of my work is, actually, that humans have the potential to be absolutely fantastic. We are potentially the most compassionate, the most caring species on this planet, but we're also the worst. We are a species of extremes. And the great challenge that we as a species have to work with now is, how do we address the potential dark side of our minds? That's both personal, it's cultural, it's social, it's international. So if we don't find ways to regulate the dark side and keep the compassionate side turned on, we're going to struggle. So finally, to take up Gonzalo's point, do I despair? Not particularly. I get angry, I become frustrated, but if I look back over 500 years, I have to say, I'm very glad I'm living today and not 500 years ago. And as Gonzalo says, it's very easy in the world of violence and political torture and all of the horrible things that are going on in the wars around the world to kind of lose heart. But the point is, we have made fantastic progress too, okay, in terms of medicine, in terms of politics, in terms of addressing things like slavery and racism. We've got a lot to do. Of course we have, but think of how far we've come. So it's very easy to get caught up into believing that the dark side still dominates us, and it does to a degree. But what I would also say is that, again, following on from Gonzalo and my other speakers, colleagues here, is that actually when we look at what's happening in the world, there's a huge amount, a large number of people who are contributing to the compassionate mind, who are wanting to see the world become a better place, to see us have better leaders, to see us have more compassionate schools, more compassionate businesses, to begin to recognize that compassion has lots of different qualities, lots of different wisdoms, and learning how to train those qualities, train those wisdoms, and help people implement compassion in their domain. That is the future for us as a society, as a culture, as a species. So I'm not despairing, although I am frightened. I get angry, of course I do, but I also think that we are moving on the challenges that our ancestors have faced, and they have brought us to this point, and our responsibility is to pick up the banner of compassion and carry it forward against the dark side. That's what we're going to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'd love to hear from you and the rest of our panel about what that actually looks like, taking up the banner. What's next? I know that so many of the people who've joined the coalition are very enthusiastic and really want to know what's next. What can they do? What can we do as an organization? There's lots of big questions there, but I'd love to hear from the panel about what you think about how we take up that banner and move forward and pursue change. I think many of us who have been engaged in training people to be more compassionate, as virtually everyone here has in different forms, and changing the world one heart at a time, I think everyone's looking beyond that. And is there something else, or what is it that we can all do that can energize this sort of movement toward compassion, towards that compassionate mind. I'd love to hear from the panel. Anybody who would like to speak up and address that?
If you don't mind, I could start with that question and also sort of connect to what my colleagues have said about despair in the world slightly. You know, and what does the future look like? About 15, 16 years ago, I was sitting at a seminar, and there was a professor of humanities there who shared a very beautiful quote with all of us. It was a Native American quote that has stayed with me since then. And this Native American quote said, you know, we do not inherit the world from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And when you borrow something from someone, as Professor Gilbert mentioned, you know, the fact that we've come a long way, we've made great changes, but we've got a long way to go. When you have borrowed something from someone, you make it a moral and ethical responsibility. You are mindful and aware of the fact that, you know, if I borrowed your jacket, I would take it to the laundry, you know, and give it back to you. If I was in your house throwing a party, and once I finished with that party, I would clean it up and make sure I give it back to you in good shape. And therefore, we really do have a moral and ethical responsibility to think about what are some of the areas in which we can improve things for the future generation. And I think that starts with understanding, you know, what is the difference between compassion and empathy? Where does despair take shape? Is it an ecological variable, or is it more despair of the mind? And so let me start with, you know, the first point. The difference between, from a psychological perspective, empathy and compassion is that we may have empathy, we may be able to feel the pain and understand the pain of others, whereas compassion, of course, as you know, is more action-oriented. And we are now entering into an era of not only just being mindful about things, not just visualizing and manifesting and thinking about things, but what's the next step? How can I become more wakeful in that understanding? How can I apply the knowledge that I have into action orientations so that I can, you know, help ourselves with the experience of what we're going through, but also with the intention and willingness to act to relieve the suffering of others. Now, then what happens? What stands in the way of us acting? Having that knowledge and having that information, knowing what those obstacles are, because, you know, we're not just human beings, we're human becomings. We're able to develop this growth mindset of looking at things through a new lens and to say that, this is what's happening. This is what's standing in the way of my development, of my growth, and of my improvement. So that how can I eradicate that? Well, we know that human beings, by and large, are pain aversive and pleasure seeking. And if we go back many moons ago, you know, and look at the way in which Mother Nature first designed our minds, was for us to survive, not necessarily to thrive. And the kinds of conversations that we're having here about a different world, a world filled with much greater compassion and less despair, and the tragedies and the atrocities that we see happening today, is one of a society that is thriving than just surviving. But if we have been designed initially, some of our foundational designs, without getting into too much technical, evolutionary, or biological basis of psychology, but to think about it from this perspective, that the way that our brain was, or a part of our brain, a certain locality of our brain, the way that it's designed, is that we routinely do three things. We overestimate threat, we underestimate our own abilities, and we underestimate opportunities. And so when we are witnessing, you know, suffering or pain of whether it's ourselves or of the other, the fact that we may underestimate our own ability to help, to get involved, we may overestimate or maximize the threat that is occurring, And then we may also not give ourselves enough credit in the fact that we do have the skills and we do have the resource. And if we don't, we can certainly find them. It would be to consider that and to look at where in our lives do we apply this ideology? Where is it within the people that we come across, in the experiences that others have? And why is it that we don't necessarily get involved? So there is this idea of selfishness that may arise from disidentification, the fact that I think I have to self-preserve rather than, get involved and demonstrate that sort of, or activate the compassion that is more action oriented. There is this idea or illusion of separateness, that if I'm okay in this particular part of the world or in my village or in my city, then therefore the suffering of somebody else may not be as integral or may not be as important. But of course, if someone somewhere is suffering, then we are all somehow responsible, or it can become our plight in one shape or form. So therefore, we have to really consider and think about that it's not just the fact that it's separate to us, and just because we may not identify with them, that it doesn't make us responsible. When looking at that kind of identification, I'd like to share a quote with you. Nelson Mandela said, "No one is born hating another person because of their color, of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn somehow to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. And for love comes more naturally to the heart than its opposite." So within that context, if we look at how is it that we see ourselves separate, and when we do see ourselves similar, there's also some other forces at play that social psychology has helped us understand. Moving forward, we need to understand that there's this idea of lack of bystander intervention. The fact that if we're witnessing the suffering of somebody else, there's a few things that happens. First of all, we think that, maybe perhaps that there's a diffusion of responsibility. I have this idea that I diffuse myself of the responsibility of getting involved because surely somebody else is doing something about it. I might also engage in evaluation apprehension. When I evaluate the suffering of somebody else, I think to myself, well, maybe I'll get judged for helping them, or I may be attached to them, or I may become connected to them, which may sort of demotivate me or result in me not getting involved. And of course, the most dangerous one is this idea of pluralistic ignorance. And this is the tendency to rely on the overt reactions of others when trying to help. And we think that the more people they are, surely somebody else is getting involved. And I talk myself out of trying to step in and trying to help out. So within the future, taking the steps of increasing compassion, we need to understand our internal ecology of what's going on and what are the obstacles that may be stopping us or hindering us from this illusion of separateness and this selfishness, as well as how is this from a connectivity to other people that we talk ourselves out of trying to activate the steps needed to take action to help others or become more compassionate.
Well, thank you, Samineh. I think you're speaking to a lot of the things we're hoping to accomplish with the coalition, and to reduce that bystander effect and actually go in the other direction, among other things. Thank you. Anyone else like to comment?
Maybe I'd like to piggyback on what Samineh was just saying in terms of being aware of the internal ecology and how our connections with others shape what we can do. Just share an experience I had about 4 years ago. I was in Peru, helping develop compassion communities in Colombia, developing compassion communities over there. And what I saw was happening, that was people that were working in their own initiatives or institutions or private practice from the logic and view of compassion, when they connected together, they feel strengthened and encouraged to keep going in that direction. And what I like to point out here is how influenced we are by the cultures that we participate in, because we as psychology, we tend to emphasize the internal processes, and personal change, but we are tremendously impacted by what's happening in the cultures that we are part of. So an idea that came up in Colombia was thinking about compassion change at a cultural level as a process of social plasticity. And this is a metaphor taken from neuroplasticity. And if we do the analogy of human beings as being neurons of a bigger brain that is society, and an analogy from the personal mind to a social mind, which would be our culture, then the kind of networks that we build, the kind of conversations that we have, and the kind of distributed conversations and projects that we develop together start creating cultures that make certain behaviors and motivations more prevalent. So something that we discuss with people in training is that, and I hope this question is not polemic, but I ask them, how many of you have a gun in your home? And most likely people don't have a gun in our homes here, at least here in Chile or Argentina, Peru, Colombia. But if we lived in the United States, probably more of us would have a gun in our homes. And that's part of the impact of the culture, where it's normalized that we have a gun, or that we eat a certain way, or that certain tendencies of our behavior are more likely than others. So just as we can have a process of neuroplasticity, of neurons firing together and building bridges that makes some behavior more likely to happen, by developing connections among people that are cultivating personally compassionate motivation, we can start spreading cultures of compassion, where compassionate behaviors and thoughts and motivations are more the norm rather than an exception. So in this point, it's very important, I think, to keep in mind that motivation, it's an instinct, it's an algorithm, as Paul puts it, but it's also trainable skills, because instinctive compassion is very limited in its scope. If we just maintain compassion as an instinct, we'll be compassionate to our in-group, to our tribe, to the people that look like me, that vote the same candidates as me. But actually, and paradoxically, that kind of in-group compassion can make us more cruel or callous to those that are not part of my group. So the problem that we have now is that we're facing global issues with a tribal mindset. Our brain hasn't changed that much in thousands of years, but our society has changed dramatically. So how can we deal with global warming with a tribal mindset? If your tribe is destroyed by global climate crisis, mine too. How can we deal with a global pandemic with a tribal mindset? It just doesn't work. How can we deal with the inequities of global markets and externalization of tertiary works with a tribal mindset? It doesn't work. So we need to make the leaps from instinctive compassion to global compassion. And well, that's part of the job that the Dalai Lama has been doing for the last 50 or 60 years, is how to expand this instinctual compassion to global compassion, recognizing our shared common humanity, and to see others are family. I mean, seeing all beings as kin, as family. Not only other human beings, although that would be a fantastic start, but to see all sentient beings as beings that deserve to be seen with dignity, respect, and compassion, and not in an instrumental way. So that part, I think we are making a lot of progress in terms of developing these networks of cultures of compassion, spreading through compassion education, compassion focused therapy, and many other wonderful initiatives. my question, and these questions go to the panel, is how can we influence in regulating the dark side, as Paul puts it? Because we can change the culture, but if it's still legal to do very nasty things to other human beings, then we find a limit in our creation of culture. So I think we have many tools for making a bottom-up change, like a change of minds, change of cultures even. But then we also need to be able to influence top-down changes. I mean, the change in the authorities and change in regulations and institutions. I think that's part of the work of what Jennifer Nadel is doing with Compassion in Politics. But I would love to hear other panelists commenting on this kind of change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I was thinking, I like the words, what I heard, when I start, I want to change the world. As I get older, I find out, maybe if I change myself, then the world will change. I like that idea. I should change the world from change yourself. So, what I did was, to apart from the individual, so we have the one individual change, then the family will change. When the family change, the community will change. So I think who is the individual I would, to educate, whoever come to our organization to seeking help. I think that's make is very, very practical in that, so because, when people come, they come from all walks of life. They are political leaders, they have, I guess in different industries and professions, also in our organization have students come all over the world. So I really firmly believe, change from individual, then, change the family, and then they can spread out. So I really enjoy what Dr. Gilbert said, the compassion dark side. I think dark side from individual, so much from trauma out stuff, So what we do is, I find over again, over this past, almost 20 some years of practice, when people can resolve the trauma in their heart, compassion will arise. So I saw so many of my students, once they couldn't even see their parents, their boss, whoever. Once the trauma resolved, then they able the compassion will come out, So I think the one way to face, to kind of solve dark side of the problem is, trauma, to kind of kill the trauma. And also I think, cultivate compassion. Also, you can prevent the trauma to continue happening. So that's how I see it. But I think dark side, really, I think, I can say that. I think we all experience that, but usually people know you so much, you have non-compassion for them, For example, my husband, sometimes the moment I want to choke him, compassion, no, not for you. So we all, it's dark and kind, we all, and change so quickly. In 1 second, you want to kill him. Another second, you have so much compassion for them. We're human beings. I think it's not, black and white. All we can intertwine so much. We just dealing that with, at the moment. In the past, I always have this big idea. Now I don't have that much big idea anymore. I think just from this moment, this current moment, whoever you're with, be mindful where you are, and try to bring compassion to yourself, and then able to bring to other people, and be an example, be a model, so people will follow. So that's how I see it. Yeah, that's all I have to share.
Thank you, Hailan. And it strikes me that this idea of changing the world one heart at a time, the inner practice kind of balanced with the outer practice, is like tilling the soil or preparing, that a few people have commented today about if we become more self-compassionate, then we might lessen some of that competitive drive, for example, as just one example, that we're doing that inner work so that the outer work can take place as well, or the bigger work. I'm wondering, Paul, did you want to chime in here?
Yes, I mean, they're all brilliant points, aren't they, really? And I love Hailan's point about healing the trauma to heal your mind, and also the fact that, of course, we all have to deal with our own dark side, because you're quite right, Hailan. We have rage, we have anger, we have hatred, okay? And learning to be mindful of what arises as it arises is one of the key skills of learning how to control our mind, because we all have minds that we never chose. I never chose to have a mind that could do all of this stuff. Nature just built it. So I've got to work out how to deal with it, right? And a lot of the problems that you get is that people who have been traumatized or whatever, they're not really aware of what it is that's driving them. They're not aware that they're driven by the dark side. So I think it's a brilliant point that you make about that. The other point is, I think, that actually compassion is exciting. All right. Why do people go into medicine? Why do they want to become doctors and surgeons and deal with horrific injuries sometimes? Because they want to heal, right? They're not going to cure everybody. They will lose some of their clients, some of their patients will die on them, and they will see terrible things. But they have an excitement that when they can heal, this gives them a real sense of celebration and joy. So sometimes I think it's very important for us to recognize that it's not just about engaging the suffering. We're engaging the suffering because we want to prevent and alleviate it. That's why we're doing it. It's not because we want to engage in suffering and feel terrible. That's not why we're doing it. We're doing that because by allowing ourselves to feel the stress and feel terrible when we engage in suffering, we want to do something about it. And that was a point that Samineh also made. And that's really quite important, but that requires a wisdom. And the final thing I'd say is that compassion is not one thing, right? The wisdom of a firefighter that will save your life is very different to the wisdom of a leader, or different to the wisdom of a parent or a counselor. They're different wisdoms, there's not one size fits all. And we're beginning to learn what wisdoms do leaders need, what wisdoms do political, business, teachers. They're all different wisdoms. And if we can help us to understand what wisdoms are the ones that really stimulate the compassion in the way that we want, that's important. And remember, like doctors and nurses and so on, we do not need to like people to help them. We just need to hold the basic thing. I do not want you to suffer. I don't need to like you. But actually, my intention is a Buddhist intention. May you be free of suffering. That is my intention, okay? That I will do everything I can to prevent me causing you suffering, and also to help you with your suffering. Whether I like you, whether I don't, is irrelevant. So that's my point, and it's exciting to do it, right? And as Gonzalo says, another aspect of the excitement is to join with others. There is a fantastic undercurrent now in the world today of people who want a better life. They want a better, more compassionate world. You can feel it in so many areas, okay? So it's tapping into that. And as Gonzalo says, really get a sense of building a community. Compassion is exciting. At times it's terrifying, at times it's annoying, at times it's enraging. But the potential, if we can pull it off, and I think we can, the future for our children and our grandchildren is looking much better than maybe it does from this point of view today.
I couldn't agree more. And if I could kind of build on your point there about the trauma that people have experienced in the dark side, I think it goes back to the point of, the importance of self-awareness, the importance of emotions, the importance of, not categorizing emotions as good or bad, because all emotions are necessary, and all emotions are, they're data. They come knocking at your door, at your cognitive corridors, and they're giving you information that something needs to move, something needs to change, something needs to, perhaps take a different shape or form. But and we can't have this discussion without talking about, the internet and social media. for many of us, the internet, we might be, immigrants into the internet. Well, for some people, we're refugees. But for my generation, we were immigrants, right? My children, my son's generation, they're locals, they're natives into the internet world. And so when you look at the kinds of messages that they have been bombarded with, amateurs and experts all mixed in together, offering quick fixes for compassion, for dealing with despair, with increasing your self-awareness. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been told, Dr. Shaheem, please, your video is maybe 1 minute long and it's a little bit too long. Can you say what you're saying in 30 seconds? Because people have a short, limited attention span. And if you just point to these things and dance around a little bit, they're more likely to pay attention than if you're to explain things properly, right? So we have all these messages and so much content that we're bombarded with on a daily basis, sifting through that content and understanding, what is relevant to us, what is good for us, what is helping our self-awareness, what is hindering our self-awareness. Some people refer to the self-help industry as the self-hell industry because it is a maze of, it's a labyrinth of confusion in many ways and a labyrinth of contradiction sometimes. And so therefore, what people, having worked in organizations, and when people say, Dr. Shaheem, we want a compassionate leadership training, really what they're saying is what we need is people to be more self-aware, to improve their listening skills, to have better responses than reactions, and to be able to have this sort of buffer between losing their emotional cool and controlling, having greater self-management and emotional intelligence that will lead to better options and choices. And I think the more specific we are, the more practical we are, and less theoretical we are, then the more effective these strategies will be. For example, if you're asking people to think about their reactions or their responses, the biggest emotional intelligence institute in the world is called 6 Seconds. Why is it called 6 Seconds? Because if we're able to manage and mitigate our emotions within that 6 seconds, then the expression, "you made me so angry," will no longer ever be valid because you only hold the remote control to your nervous system, and it can be a decision to which you decide to lose that emotional control or not. But if you look at your responses on a continuum, we have choices. You have a choice whether you want to be furious, whether you want to be curious, or whether you want to be courteous or compassionate. And when you remind yourself that I have a choice to choose from that spectrum, you're no longer just hijacked because of your responses or how you may be feeling or triggers or stimuli from the outside.
I love that we're getting into the messy stuff, to be honest. And you're speaking to this, and Paul did, and Gonzalo as well. I think this is the work of our Global Compassion Coalition, of being willing to engage with people, as Paul's saying, you don't have to like someone to be compassionate, and to really address what I think Gonzalo brought up earlier, and I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on. I think what's most disheartening for me when I look around is both what seeming enormity of the challenges we face, but especially the polarization, the taking of sides, and how hurtful that is, and how difficult it is to share what this wisdom that Samineh has shared, and Paul, each of you in your own way, how to convey that to what we individually might see as the other side of any particular issue or challenge that we face, and how can we be, for me, this is my sort of personal mission with the coalition, is how do we take a stand rather than taking a side in regard to difficult conflicts and this polarization, where we're sort of doomed to failure if we're just sort of pushing one agenda on one side of a particular issue rather than seeing the human scope of basically every issue that we face in the world. And how do we engage the people that we disagree with, the ones we don't necessarily like or think we don't like? How can we do that? That's what would give me hope, if I had to sense that there was a way of meeting people of all different perspectives in the way we are here, in a certain kind of way, to see what we can actually do when we are, because we're better together. We're better together as a coalition, but also better together as a human race if we are seeing the common humanity that exists even when people stand on two sides or four sides of a particularly thorny issue like global warming or racial injustice or all of the various things that we face. Any thoughts about how we work with polarization?
The small point really is that never before has humanity had to deal with the media. And the problem with the media, particularly the right-wing media, is that they're interested in conflict and selling the blood on the carpet. That's what they do. That's what they're about. And so they're interested in stimulating division, conflict, and so forth. And if you look at what the media has been doing, certainly in this country over the last 10 years, they've been constantly stirring and stirring and stirring. So I think one of the things we need to do, Steve, is to really think about our media and get control of our media. That has to be a really important issue, because if we allow them to keep publishing in the way that they're publishing and stimulating conflicts in the way that they do. In this country, we had Brexit, where we left the European Union, and a lot of that was based on the right-wing media stimulating fear of immigration. There's nothing to do with economics. They said it was, but it wasn't. Now, that's the kind of thing that it really is driving the dark side. So one of the things I'm really keen about is to hear from media people, those who are studying the media studies, journalist studies, to think about how can journalism clean up its act, because it absolutely has to clean up its act. Because at the moment, some of it is really a force for the dark side, not the compassion side. So that would be my little view. We need to get journalists and the journalist professions involved with thinking about how are we going to have the kind of media you want, which is having sensible, open, empathic discussions and political debates about differences and conflict. We need that, because out of the conflict comes solutions, but not out of this, I just want to show you how bad you are.
Yeah. I think you just inspired the next panel discussion, or one coming soon to a global compassion coalition near you. Gonzalo.
Yeah, a point that Paul raised up earlier, and you resonate with that, Steve, was that compassion is not passive. Actually, passion is part of the word compassion, I think, for a good reason. And I think to talk about the nature of compassion as being a motivation and not just soothing is important. This is a point that Paul has been stressing for decades now. I think that usually people think about compassion, about soothing, calming, which is all good depending on the circumstance. But I think a lot of the compassion that we need nowadays, because of the kind of situation that we're facing, is to take action, is to be passionate about something, is to be motivated or excited, as he said. So probably many of you who are here are familiar with the three-circle model, the three systems of emotional regulation that Paul has created and shared a lot. And compassion is a driving force for change. It's in the blue system of moving ourselves towards something that we want to develop. And I think in that sense too, I think competition has a bad rap among people who are interested in compassion. And I think competitiveness is good, for instance, and being driven is good. Depends on what you're driven and what you're competing about. Maybe I can try to be the best psychologist to defeat other psychologists, or I want to be the best psychologist I can be to help more people and to do the best work I can do for the service of others. I think the Dalai Lama is very passionate person. He wakes up at 3:30 every morning to practice, and he develops the mind of bodhicitta, wanting to be awakened for the benefit of all beings. Huge motivation. And I think nowadays, as an American historian put it, Howard Zinn, we cannot be neutral in a moving train. The train is moving. You know? Social media works in certain ways. For instance, as Paul puts it, the algorithms of Instagram, for instance, are designed to show you what will trigger difficult emotions, because that gives more clicks, and that rise up the contributions for sponsor and so on. So it's based on a model that triggers hatred, basically, and it's not just right-wing media. It's part of how it's built to make you click. If you're angry, if you're frustrated. So and I've seen this in my own interaction with social networks. Sometimes the nastier comments comes up. So it's that what you see first, so that you're bothered by that and you interact with the content. So I think it's very good to develop calm, soothing, befriending, and so on, which has been very much emphasized by the work, for instance, of mindful self-compassion, which is fantastic. And part of what we do in therapy is soothing, calming, and stimulating the green soothing affiliation system. But I think we really need to get bluer, you know, to be more passionate about compassion, and to recognize some motivation that can change the person, our relationships, and society. But because otherwise, people that have these huge interests, political or economic, they are very driven. They're not going to be defeated by just soothing. We have to come up with plans and strategies to do things in the world in a different way.
Yeah, and I'd like to add 2 points to what you just said, Gonzalo. Yes, couldn't agree more about the media and the polarization of the media, but that media is being consumed. There's a demand for it. And we have to be much more sort of engage in critical thinking and avoid confirmation biases and various other cognitive biases that we engage in. And so really, we should be much more responsible with seeking out objective, reliable, valid, empirical information, rather than one that has been spun, instead of being lazy and wanting to be spoon-fed those sort of those hits of dopamine. I think we need to take it upon ourselves, first of all, not to consume that information that is more polarizing. The second thing is the fact that, you know, what is a cancel culture good for anyways? You know, when you punish people or individuals that disagree with you and stamp them with a cancel mark on them, you're never going to communicate. Why don't we have a culture of communication, a culture of compassion, as we're doing here, rather than cancel? I mean, can you imagine this is an entire culture. It's an entire sort of way of thinking and approach to dealing with those that that think differently than us. And so the mark of an intelligent, evolved critical thinker is to be able to have a discussion with somebody else without necessarily having to persuade them, that you're able to hold these opposing truths or ideas without feeling threatened about your own values or about your own ideas. And so because of all this noise that's out there, we're losing touch with our own internal voice and with our own internal compass. We're highly reliant on all the information, the media, and so on and so forth that we're bombarded with on a daily basis. And if we don't become more in tune with our internal compass, we're whole, we're unique, we're incredibly resourceful. And we sort of foreclose our thinking, or we what's the word that they refer to, that we lend out? I forgot the business term. So we kind of give it to somebody else, to our brains, we loan out to somebody else lease them out to somebody else to think for us, whereas we should do more of the thinking ourselves.
Yes, I like to also respond, I like this idea, Paul Gilbert, Paul Gilbert said the polarization. And also, I agree with
Samineh?
Samineh.
Samineh, yes. Or you can call me Sam.
Yes, you said, media is consumed, so my view is, political, and media, they all, are actually composed by the people, individual people. So, whoever have the power, like you have the big leaders, they can really dominant, quite big. If you have a dominant media, they are going to, spread more news. So what I think is still, I really think even from organization, from the country and from big media, still, change from the individual. The people who have more power, if you change them, you have probably you can influence or impact the whole group of people. And I really think people change by pain or by love. So we have been I've been working with media for a long time. So I've recorded, so we have this it's not online TV, series or program what I have, kind of like, so I think I don't believe fighting, argue. I think if you argue with people, just confirm their own position. I don't never ever argue with people. I don't think that's very effective. What I do is, probably I just, use real life experience, shows the, how compassion can really change people, change family. So I think that's more effective than, you criticize. Criticize just make more polarized, So I'm thinking in the response with compassion, and also use lots of real cases show how that really change people, change the family, change the organization. Usually the leader of organization come to our group to study, they will change the whole organization, culture. So that's how I see that how we work. I don't think criticize will never ever work. I don't never do that, So I'm thinking just, probably just use real example, real case, and respond with kindness and compassion. I think that's the word changes. Changes, when we talk about the global, when we talk about the country, when we talk about the whole organization, I think all this change from one person. So I really, really firmly believe, change one person. If you change the person who is in power, you really can change that organization. You change that country. That's what I have been doing. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Hailan. I love that we're tapping into both the challenges and the opportunities of our culture today, and this again, working one heart at a time. And I'm also kind of wondering if the panel might briefly chat about, in our final time together here, the idea about whether maybe if there's evidence to this effect, but even if it's just your opinion, can compassion become contagious? Can compassion go viral on social media rather than the nasty comments that Gonzalo was referencing? Could we as a coalition, as one of our many efforts, foster that compassionate contagion amongst individuals where they're connected in an interesting way? Looking for a little hope here around how we might start, as this huge coalition comes together, how we can contribute to that possibility in the world. What do you think?
Well, I think absolutely. Two things. Firstly, a lot of the hatred and all the stuff is really based on fear. It's all fear-based, really. And really, if we can help people feel safe, that's another conversation perhaps. But the understanding what actually looks like hatred underneath that are individuals who are really frightened of rejection or whatever. But the reason I think it can go viral is because everybody wants it. If you ask anybody what their vision of heaven is, mostly it's not to be tortured and brutalized. Everybody's view of heaven would mostly be a place where, we're free, we're safe, we're loved, we're connected, and so on and so on. So people want compassion. That once they understand what it is, they want it. So you're really pushing on an open door. The problem is the inhibitors. That's why we do all our research. It's the inhibitors that get in the way. And if you can peel those off a little bit, compassion will flourish, because that's basically what people want. That's what makes them happy. That's what gives them meaning, the sense of connectedness, the sense of making a contribution, the sense of being valued, the sense of being able to be helpful. That's what they want. And COVID actually showed that very clearly. Many individuals really, we had over 500,000 people volunteering in this country to go and help people with COVID and so on. So yes, it can go viral if we address the inhibitors, and the inhibitors are to do with this dark side and also the fear that's generated through, as Hailan says, trauma and so on.
So I'll address this question, and I say definitely there's a lot to be hopeful about. And again, going back to what Paul said, all we need to do is look at historical development and progression and how much we have actually progressed. So we definitely have the potential. We're nowhere near what we can be capable of. I think that there's a couple of reasons why compassion can be contagious. Well, first of all, if we look at conformity studies, and we see that, within conformity studies that people are likely to conform to the behaviors of others if we're able to bypass our default modality. And the default modality is one of first survival. But if we think about how can we thrive and do better and live better, and then we are driven to conform because of that sense of belonging and connectivity, and that conformity can be contagious as well and have an impact on people. And finally, I think the reason that it is definitely possible for us to, for compassion to be contagious is looking at the health benefits that it can have. As soon as people can activate, as Gonzalo said, if you're activating compassion, if you're taking action steps to engage in it for self-compassion and others, and then you're able to experience the health benefits associated with it, the better mindset, the perspectives that you have, optimism, better decision-making, clarity and thought, a stronger immunity, greater mental toughness. When people experience the benefits of engaging in compassionate behavior, that will also encourage the spread of it and the continuation of it.
I can jump in. So
Please.
I think an obvious I forgot the word in English, something that is in opposition with the opposed extreme of compassion is cruelty, but a more common one is indifference. I think we definitely can be contagious about compassion, and we are very susceptible to be modeled by others that act in a compassionate way. The thing, as Samineh put it, is to practice being the one that breaks the rule of not doing anything. That's one thing, is to practicing moving beyond the comfort zone, and maybe step in to be the one that helps in a public situation when something happens. Maybe nobody will, when something bad happens, maybe nobody's offering help, but when one person helps, then others know, so there's the possibility of doing something about it. So we are very open to be modeled by others in positive and negative ways, because we have evil and we have good inside. So I think practicing that, moving out of that comfort zone and being the one that offers helps or who challenges injustice in very, maybe even simple ways, something that has become quite common to me in these past few years is to be in groups where there is a joke, a misogynistic joke, maybe, for instance, and not to laugh or saying something about it instead of just shutting up, you know? Or I've changed my way of eating. I don't eat animals for many years now and became vegan for 4 years ago. And I'm surrounded by people that love barbecues, you know, and just to be the dissident and not to humiliate anyone, just to open the mind that other possibilities are interesting too. Like, I never thought that maybe animals don't want to be murdered by and become food. Just finding little ways in showing up, not in an egocentric way, but just being natural, that can open imagination of other ways of relating to others and the world. And I think that's something that we can all do. And then not be too shy in sharing the light. We can become narcissistic, you know, in sharing the light, but we can also be humble, but still saying, hey, I'm doing this, or we are doing this, or these people are doing this, and that opens imagination of what we can do. I think we have too many bad news, and we need to spread the good news in different ways too. So I think we want not only we can be contagiated by compassion, but we like it. People, when people see a good news, they want to share it. You know, when they see something beautiful, something inspiring in their feed, they send it right away to other people because they feel the warm glow. No, they feel the elevation they want to share.
Okay, I like to respond to that. You know, I think viral in my mind, you know, I was thinking, what is viral? You know, viral usually like how many views or streams, you know, different levels of viral. As viral, you know, I agree with Samineh, because that's what you shared. But you know, so I think the one, if I think in my mind, viral is when the big event happened. And then, you know, so, you know, that's very good opportunity to kind of spread news. Like when we have this China, especially China, of the COVID-19 situation is very, very dire. And so, you know, I think we did several because people just couldn't go there. In China's living situation is very limited, all in the apartment, very small. So not American, or even the COVID in the stay home, you still have big house, right? But in China, this very situation very limited. You know, what we did was, you know, because you know this, then the COVID, and we choose topic, then we have this like over 500,000 people online, and several times, you know, so then you can spread news, and people feel like you give them method, you know, then they use it. They can help them immediately. So much of the exercise, then they will spread out. In my mind, as one way of spread. You know, and also some very, very famous person, when they're in trouble, and you kind of use this way of teaching them, then they will spread out. You know, the people was really crazy about the movie stars, you know, the singers, you know, if they want to do something, all their people kind of follow. I think that's one way of go viral. Another way, I think, just create community. You create a community that may have more people, not one person, a few person. You know, you have like in our situation, several thousand people, you know, spread out. I think we create kind of like, you know, a trend already. And people think about, oh, you don't know self-compassion. Seem like you're out of the date, you know. So we can spread for media setting. If you do not know compassion, self-compassion, You just, kind of, you're out of date. It's a really modern trend. Modern trend is everybody, the people very trendy as self-compassion. Otherwise, you're just out of date, so it's not a way to do it. So that's my little part.
Beautiful. Thank you. I think, Hailan, I think you just laid out the task of the Global Compassion Coalition there in one short message, or all of you did. Thank you so much for all of our panelists and for you taking the time and contributing your wisdom. We've had some lovely comments from our viewers, and I so appreciate your time with this. This is only the beginning. We're all speaking to what this coalition has the capability of doing, and I'm happy that we kind of ended on this hopeful note, and more to come for sure. And the link to the GCC website was in the chat. We'd love to have you as a member. If you're not already a member, it's free to join. Your commitment is up to you. We don't want the bystander effect. To go back to Samineh's comment, we're going to be finding a number of ways for people to engage, and one way is to just listen to these conversations and to share them. The recording will be shared with all the people who registered, including those of you who were here. So you're welcome to pass that along on social media, etc. So thank you all so much for your time, both those participants and our panelists. And may all of this lead to a more compassionate world, one day at a time. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.